Following the defeat of Axis powers during the Second World War, the Strategic Scientific Reserve became the espionage agency SHIELD, with Howard Stark serving on the Leadership Council as a founding member. The brilliant inventor, engineer, and scientist developed deep ties to the government throughout the war and beyond, with his company Stark Industries becoming the nation's biggest supplier of weapons and advanced technologies. As a result, SHIELD agents often had access to the very best and newest equipment available. However, one of the most remarkable discoveries of the post-war era was made not by Stark or his people, but by a SHIELD scientist and consultant named Hank Pym. Discovering an extra-dimensional subatomic particle which could expand and shrink both in height and weight, he named it after himself and harnessed this technology to power the Ant-Man suit, which gave its wearer those same powers. Despite his pride at having discovered something so incredible, Hank was concerned it would be used for nefarious purposes and chose to keep his research hidden, refusing to surrender his work to SHIELD. Though Howard Stark and others tried to pressure him into giving up his findings, he was steadfast in his refusal, trusting only himself with the technology. As a result, Hank Pym served as the Ant-Man for several years, going on covert missions for SHIELD, aided by another of his inventions, the EMP communication device, which allowed him to telepathically communicate with ants, which could provide support in his shrunken state. Eventually, Hank was joined on his missions by his wife Janet, who wore her own Wasp suit they developed together with wings that allowed her to fly. However, during a mission to stop a Soviet missile from reaching America, the Wasp sacrificed herself by using the suit's regulator to shrink to subatomic size, becoming small enough to enter and disarm the missile, but then continuing to shrink until reaching the quantum realm, unable to bring herself back. Hank, devastated by the loss of his wife, gave up his role as Ant-Man, hiding the suit away and eventually resigning from SHIELD, founding his own company he named Pym Technologies. The enterprise proved successful and made him a billionaire, but in truth he found no happiness as he was obsessed with researching what happened to his wife and seeing if there was a way to bring her back. His obsession and long work hours estranged him from his daughter Hope, who he sent away to boarding school. As Hank grew older, he was betrayed by his protege Darren Cross when he organized a vote to oust his mentor as CEO, with Hope casting the deciding vote against the founder. Retiring to his mansion, Pym stayed away for years, but was called back in 2015 when Darren Cross invited him to watch the unveiling of the Yellowjacket, a new battlesuit they had developed using Pym particle technology, which Hank tried to bury decades earlier. Cross took pleasure in proving himself to his old mentor and informed him that he planned to sell the suit, with various organizations like Hydra sending representatives to bid on the item. Knowing that he had to stop Cross from going through with the sale, Hank hatched a plan to find a new Ant-Man to break into his old company and steal the Yellowjacket. Although his daughter Hope trained for years to fight and use this technology and agreed that Darren Cross needed to be stopped, Hank did not want to risk her life and sought to find someone competent but ultimately expendable for the mission. He also refused to take his concerns to the Avengers because of their connection to the Starks, who he felt could not be trusted. And so through his research he found Scott Lang, an ex-convict with a degree in electrical engineering and a selfless heart who in his youth stole from criminals and returned the items to their rightful owners. When he married his wife Maggie and had their daughter Cassie, Scott gave up his life of crime and went to work for VistaCorp. Yet when he discovered that the CEO, Jeff Zorich, was purposely overcharging customers, he took it upon himself to hack into their system and give the money back. However, he grew overconfident, breaking into the CEO's mansion, and was arrested after crashing his boss's car into the pool. Sentenced to 3 years in San Quentin State Penitentiary, his wife soon divorced him and remarried, taking their daughter to live with a police officer named Jim Paxton. When Scott was at last released from prison, he struggled on the outside, forced to stay with his old cellmate Luis, while his wife refused to allow him regular visits with his daughter, unless he found a job and paid the child support he owed. However, he was unable to find steady employment, even losing a position at Baskin-Robbins because of his past as an ex-con. And so when Luis, along with his friends Dave and Kurt, presented an opportunity for a big score by robbing an old billionaire, Scott reluctantly agreed to take the job. Using his skills as a burglar and engineer, he successfully broke into the mansion of Hank Pym and got through its security only to find the Ant-Man suit and nothing more. Believing he found nothing of value, Scott took what he thought was a motorcycle suit and departed. Back at his friend's home, he tried on the suit and was alarmed to hear the voice of Hank Pym in his ear, eventually learning that the entire ordeal was prearranged, with Scott having been selected to be the new Ant-Man in exchange for a promise to help pay his overdue child support. Though Scott found his new powers alarming and difficult to control, he was rigorously trained both by Hank and his daughter Hope, eventually learning to control his ant army and becoming proficient in suit combat, armed with Pym particle discs he could throw to instantly shrink or grow random objects during a fight. In order to go through with their plan, Hank sent Ant-Man to steal a signal decoy from an old warehouse, which they soon learned had recently been converted to an Avengers facility. Despite the mission being called off when they learned of the increased security, Scott chose to continue on, even defeating the Avenger Falcon in combat to successfully steal the device they needed. Now prepared to steal the Yellowjacket, Ant-Man set out to infiltrate Cross Technologies, but found that Darren Cross was prepared, having taken various precautions which allowed him to initially capture Ant-Man, though he soon escaped, resulting in a battle. Putting on the Yellowjacket, Cross engaged against Ant-Man in a momentous struggle that soon endangered his daughter Cassie, and only ended when Scott used his suit's regulator to shrink to the subatomic level, just as Hank's wife had done years earlier. By becoming so small, he was able to infiltrate the Yellowjacket suit and destroy it from the inside, before shrinking to the quantum realm where he may have been lost forever. Fortunately, he had with him a Pym particle disc, which he put inside the regulator and used to grow him back to normal size. After returning to his reality, Scott found himself in trouble with the law as an ex-con engaged in vigilantism, resulting in the destruction of property. But in the end, his ex-wife's husband, Jim, used his connections to help him sort out these issues, with Scott having gained the respect and admiration of his family and friends for his actions as the superhero Ant-Man. However, as Scott's life was getting back on track, even starting a relationship with Hope, Hank Pym was more interested in studying his return from the quantum realm, starting to believe that it may be possible to bring back his long-lost wife. In preparing for this new project, he decided it was finally time for his daughter to take her place alongside the Ant-Man, inheriting the mantle of the Wasp. Following the destruction of Sokovia during the Avengers battle with Ultron in 2015, as well as the deaths of dozens of innocent people during the battle with Crossbones in Nigeria the following year, many of the world's nations gathered together and wrote the Sokovia Accords, enacting a set of rules and regulations for enhanced individuals. However, during the United Nations signing ceremony in Austria, the Vienna International Center was bombed, killing many, including King T'Chaka of Wakanda. Although the terrorist Helmut Zemo was behind the attack, it was blamed on the deadly assassin Winter Soldier, previously known as Bucky Barnes, the childhood friend of Steve Rogers. Already at odds over the merits of the Sokovia Accords, the hunt for Winter Soldier further divided the Avengers, as Captain America was convinced of his friend's innocence. Determined to learn the truth, Captain America gathered together his allies, including Winter Soldier, Falcon, Hawkeye, and Scarlet Witch. Yet because they were helping a wanted fugitive and working outside the law, Iron Man was ordered to arrest them, and so gathered together his own team, including Vision, War Machine, Black Widow, Black Panther, and Spider-Man. Believing that they needed additional support for the approaching conflict, Captain America recruited Scott Lang, also known as Ant-Man, recommended by Falcon, who once faced him in combat. Eager to help an American hero like Steve Rogers, Ant-Man enthusiastically agreed to join them, without informing his mentor Hank Pym, or his girlfriend Hope Van Dyne, who wore her own suit and was known as the Wasp. These two opposing Avengers factions then collided at a German airport, where Ant-Man introduced himself by returning Captain America's shield after it was stolen by Spider-Man. During the ensuing battle, Ant-Man faced off against Black Widow and made himself small enough to ride an arrow shot by Hawkeye in order to enter Iron Man's suit and damage it from the inside. Needing a distraction, Ant-Man used his suit's regulator to grow into Giant Man, allowing Captain America and Winter Soldier to reach a Quinjet and escape. In the aftermath of the battle, Ant-Man, Hawkeye, Scarlet Witch, and Falcon were arrested, while War Machine was badly injured, leaving his legs paralyzed. Continuing their investigation, Captain America soon proved Winter Soldier's innocence, capturing the true culprit Helmut Zemo. However, even after the terrorist was captured, the Avengers remained divided, with Captain America breaking his allies out of prison before going into hiding. Yet because Hawkeye and Ant-Man both had families and could not simply disappear, they chose to turn themselves in, making deals to retire and serve a sentence under house arrest. Although Scott's family were willing to forgive his criminal behavior, believing that he was legitimately willing to leave it behind and focus on being a father to his daughter Cassie, Hank Pym and Hope Van Dyne were less understanding, as they were soon targeted by the FBI for their association with Ant-Man, becoming fugitives when they fled. Yet while they lost their home and freedom, Hank and his daughter were able to rescue much of their research, as it was kept in a mobile lab, an entire building that could be shrunk down to the size of a suitcase. Cutting off ties with Scott Lang, they continued their research into the quantum realm, hoping to find a way to bring back the original Wasp, Janet Van Dyne, lost decades earlier. And after nearly 2 years of work, their efforts paid off by constructing a tunnel which would allow Hope to enter the quantum realm and extract her mother. Once completed, they powered up the tunnel, only for it to quickly overload and shut down. However, for a brief moment the connection was successfully established, allowing Janet Van Dyne to send a message through Scott Lang, having become entangled with him during his time in the quantum realm several years earlier. When Scott Lang informed them that he had a vivid dream about finding a little girl hiding in a dresser, they realized it was a memory of Janet and her daughter, believing this meant she was still alive. Although Scott was prohibited from leaving his home, Hope set up a decoy, allowing for Ant-Man to once again take his place by the Wasp's side. In an effort to secure a necessary component to keep the tunnel functioning and stable, they made an enemy of Sonny Birch, a black market tech dealer determined to acquire their research. And while this made their work more difficult, they faced further challenges when they were attacked by an enhanced individual known as Ghost, with the ability to phase and pass through solid objects. She too sought to steal the mobile lab, hoping to use their technology to cure her molecular disequilibrium, acquired after an accident in her father's lab, where he experimented with research originally developed under Hank Pym at S.H.I.E.L.D. After a number of brief battles between the competing factions, Scott recruited his friends at Ex-Con Security to help secure the lab, eventually allowing them to complete the tunnel when Janet took possession of Scott's body and helped complete the calculations. However, with Ant-Man and the Wasp busy fighting Ghost, it fell to Hank Pym to put on a suit and travel into the quantum realm to find and bring back his long-lost wife, who they soon realized had acquired new powers during her time away. Janet Van Dyne then used these new quantum abilities to stabilize Ghost's energy, saving her from the immediate threat to her life. Meanwhile, Sonny Birch was arrested for his crimes, while Scott Lang was not, having successfully hid his involvement from law enforcement, allowing him to complete his 2 years of house arrest to become a free man. Having repaired his relationship with Hope and her family, Scott then continued to serve as the Ant-Man alongside the Wasp, and aided in their research, soon sent back into the quantum realm to retrieve a sample they might use to cure Ghost permanently. However, when Ant-Man completed his mission and asked to be brought back, the countdown ended in silence, as this exact moment coincided with the victory of Thanos at the Battle of Wakanda, collecting all 6 Infinity Stones to exterminate half the population of the universe. Unfortunately, this happened to include Hank, Janet, and Hope, who all vanished into black ash, leaving Ant-Man trapped in the quantum realm. Love audiobooks? Then be sure to check out Audible, where they have the world's largest collection available. Simply sign up through the link in the description box below and get 2 free audiobooks to start out. A special thanks to all those who contribute to Civilization X, like Kristen Greeneyes of the Company of the Cat, Fred Heartless, Knight of Iron and Ice, The Spectral Knight, and Sigvald Mammothsbane. If you'd like to help Civilization X, click on the Patreon link, and please be sure to like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and click on the links to see more.